Remember when the biggest drama in your week was whether a radio host would ever win an argument in his own living room? Well, from 1993 to 2004, Frasier aired on NBC for 11 seasons and somehow made opera jokes and sibling rivalry must-see TV. The series starred Kelsey Grammer as Dr. Frasier Crane, a radio psychiatrist with a velvet voice and a titanium ego. And alongside him was David Hyde Pierce as Niles, the younger brother who made Frasier look emotionally well-adjusted by comparison. Jane Leeves as Daphne Moon, the psychic housekeeper who couldn't predict how many cranes she'd have to manage. Perry Gilpin as Roz Doyle, the only person at KACL who could shut Frasier down mid-broadcast. And John Mahoney as Martin Crane, the flannel-wearing dad who treated fine art like it was a coupon problem. Now, born from the shadows of Cheers, the show moved Frasier from a Boston bar to a Seattle radio booth and turned a supporting character into one of television's most decorated leads. Today we're going to count down 15 weird facts about Frasier. And stick around for number one, because half of Hollywood was secretly calling into Frasier's radio show, and nobody in the audience had a clue. But before we jump in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hype this video up. It helps YouTube show this to more retro fans just like you. All right, let's get on the air. Number 15, Kelsey Grammer played Frasier Crane for 20 straight years. Now, most television actors play a character for 3, maybe 5 seasons. You collect a syndication check and then move on with your life. But Kelsey Grammer, he looked at that model and decided that it was for quitters. The man played Frasier Crane for 20 consecutive years, 2 uninterrupted decades of one human being saying, "I'm listening," into a microphone while an entire nation pretended that that was a normal length of employment. It started in 1984 on Cheers, when a stuffy psychiatrist wandered into a Boston bar in season 3, and he embedded himself into the cast and just decided to live there. Grammer stayed until Cheers wrapped in 1993, and then packed up the character and moved him to Seattle for 11 more seasons without so much as a gap year. Over 460 episodes across Cheers, Frasier, and a guest spot on Wings that quietly stitched the whole sitcom universe together. That streak tied the longevity record held by James Arness and Milburn Stone on Gunsmoke. And then the man couldn't leave it alone. When the 2023 Frasier revival premiered, Grammer officially blew past that record. The years, they weren't consecutive anymore, but now he played the same character across 4 different decades: the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2020s. Number 14, Lisa Kudrow was Roz Doyle for 3 days. Now, Lisa Kudrow was Roz Doyle, signed, sealed, and sitting in a Seattle radio booth, ready to go. Frasier's producers handed her the part in 1993, and the whole arrangement survived exactly 3 days. That's shorter than most free trials. Creators David Angel, Peter Casey, and David Lee built Roz to be Frasier Crane's only functioning check engine light. Kudrow auditioned, and everyone was impressed, and she locked down the gig. But then rehearsals happened. Every time Kelsey Grammer wound Frasier up to full insufferable monologue speed, Kudrow's natural warmth just absorbed it. The character was supposed to fire back, and instead, the room kept watching a pompous psychiatrist gently steamroll the sweetest person in the whole building. The producers had designed a verbal sparring partner, and they accidentally cast a conflict de-escalator. But Perry Gilpin, the runner-up, got the call. The woman walked on set like she'd been winning arguments with overdressed men since middle school. She matched Grammer's energy without flinching, and Roz snapped into focus overnight. Meanwhile, Kudrow's career, it pulled off the most spectacular faceplant to backflip in sitcom history. Because months later, a little pilot called Friends Like Us needed a guitarist with zero grip on how normal conversations work. Kudrow showed up, she invented Phoebe Buffay, and unleashed Smelly Cat on an entire generation. Number 13, Niles didn't exist until someone saw a headshot. Now, the original version of Frasier had Frasier Crane as an only child. The most pompous man in Seattle was supposed to carry 11 seasons of snobbery, just completely solo. And the early plan was tight. It was Frasier and Martin, father and son, opera versus ball games, snob versus everyman. Distance the show from Cheers and keep the world pretty small. A brother was never in the outline, the pitch, or anyone's real imagination. But then casting director Jeff Greenberg saw a headshot of a relatively unknown stage actor named David Hyde Pierce, and the entire show shifted on its axis. They met Pierce, and somewhere between the handshake and the audition, they realized that they accidentally discovered the most dangerous thing in comedy: a mirror. A second Frasier, equally refined, equally neurotic, and somehow even more tightly wound. That one headshot rewired the entire series. The sibling rivalry fueled half the show's best episodes, and Niles and Daphne's slow burn became the emotional backbone of 11 seasons. And David Hyde Pierce personally collected 4 Emmys for a character that started as a photograph that someone happened to glance at on the right afternoon. Number 12, the entire show almost never happened. Now, the most awarded sitcom in Emmy history at that time almost had nothing to do with Seattle, a radio booth, or even a single glass of sherry. And the people who created it are the ones who tried to bury it. And when Cheers wrapped in 1993, Kelsey Grammer wanted distance. They were terrified of building what they called a poor man's Cheers, a warmed-over spin-off living in Sam Malone's shadow. So they overcorrected in the most spectacular way possible and pitched NBC a show where Grammer played a wealthy and egotistical media mogul that was paralyzed in a motorcycle accident, running his empire from a Manhattan penthouse bed while sparring with a street-smart live-in nurse. Then Paramount TV president John Pike reportedly sat Grammer down at dinner and said, "I think sitcoms should be funny."
Well, duh.
NBC killed the pitch and told the team to bring back Frasier Crane. So the team got stuck rebuilding a show around a character that they'd been actively running from. Seattle was chosen specifically to put a continent between Frasier and Boston. The radio show became an intellectual version of a bar. It was the same rhythm, swapped beer tabs for microphones, and emotionally unstable callers. Martin Crane got engineered as a blue-collar wrecking ball that was aimed at his son's pretensions. But by the time it wrapped, Frasier had collected 37 primetime Emmys, a record for a comedy series that stood until Modern Family eventually matched and then passed it. Number 11, Maris was supposed to be a real character. Maris Crane was supposed to actually appear on the show. She had a name, a husband, and at one point, the producers even had Julia Duffy in mind to play her. But then the writer's room discovered the most addictive game in television, making Maris worse. Now, it started small. It was a joke about her being thin, a comment about her being pale, standard sitcom wife material. But the room couldn't stop. Every episode, someone pitched a new detail, and every detail made her more biologically ridiculous. She once got lost behind a piece of patio furniture. She strained her back, picking up what she thought was her purse, but turned out to be a helium balloon. The woman practically evaporated indoors if the lighting was too warm. By mid-season 1, the writers had described a human being who could not physically exist on this planet. They turned Niles Crane's wife into a medical impossibility with a socialite calendar. The whole room realized that they built a trap. You cast an actual actress, and the joke, it dies on contact. So the producers made the call. Maris would never appear on screen, ever. And the secret weapon holding the whole thing together was David Hyde Pierce. The man could describe Maris with such tender, delusional conviction that audiences got a clearer picture of her than any casting choice ever could have delivered. Number 10, Eddie the dog got more fan mail than Kelsey Grammer. Now, for all the high society that Grammer or the rest of the cast offered, the biggest star was a Jack Russell Terrier who got more mail than all of them combined. Moose, the dog who played Eddie, reportedly received hundreds of letters a week, fan praise, job offers, and breeding proposals from people who genuinely believed that this animal needed professional representation. The staring contest became one of the show's best running gags. Moose was trained to hold an unblinkable lock on Grammer for absurdly long stretches. It wrecked Grammer every single time. Now, by season 7, age, it caught up a bit. Moose's fur was going white, and the crew was quietly tinting it with dog-safe dye between takes. His trainer, Mathilde de Cagny, had specifically bred Moose to produce a successor, and one pup hit the genetic jackpot. Same markings, same withering stare, and his name was Enzo, and the role of Eddie became a family dynasty. The two dogs reportedly despised each other, though. Trainers had to keep them separated because Moose would snap at his own son on sight. Now, 7 seasons as the most popular performer on a hit sitcom, and the old man, well, he didn't handle his succession so well, right? It was more like a boardroom coup. When the series filmed its 2004 finale, they carried Moose out, nearly 14, practically blind, completely white, and the audience gave him the loudest standing ovation of the night. Number 9, Eddie's affection ran on sardine oil and liver paste. Every tender moment between Eddie and the Frasier cast was powered entirely by fish paste and deception. Moose was a trained professional, but the animal had zero interest in showering Kelsey Grammer with genuine affection. He was a high-drive working dog, and he worked exclusively for snacks. Now, if a scene called for Eddie to kiss someone, the makeup department would dab sardine oil directly onto the actor's face. Trainers hid peanut butter or liver paste behind the earlobe or along the hairline if a scene needed a sweet nuzzle into someone's ear. The audience at home saw a dog expressing unconditional love. But the dog, well, he saw a snack delivery system shaped like a man. And for those staring contests, well, his trainer would stand directly behind Grammer, holding a clicker and a piece of dried liver. Ooh, keeping Moose locked on target. Eddie, he wasn't silently judging a pompous psychiatrist. He was tracking Jerky with the focus of a sniper. Now, Grammer reportedly had complicated feelings about the whole operation. Being constantly dabbed with oily fish products meant that Moose's fur carried a permanent sardine smell. not exactly the accessory of choice for a man in tailored suits. John Mahoney took the opposite approach. The man loved Moose. He let him sit in his lap between takes, and he never complained once. Number 8. The theme song was a psychiatric riddle. Now, for 11 seasons, millions of people belted out, "Toss salads and scrambled eggs, dooba-dooba," without once stopping to wonder why a psychiatrist's theme song sounded like a brunch menu having an identity crisis. Now, the show almost didn't get an original theme at all. The producers initially tried to license Joni Mitchell's 1974 song Twisted for the closing credits, but the rights became such a hassle that they scrapped the idea entirely, which turned out to be the best dead end in sitcom history. Composer Bruce Miller and lyricist Daryl Finnessy got one strict rule: no direct mentions of psychiatry, radio, or the word Frasier. Nothing on the nose. So Miller wrote the music, and Finnessy did the most Frasier thing imaginable. He hid the entire premise inside a jazz metaphor. Scrambled eggs, it wasn't about breakfast. It was about scrambled minds. Tossed salads, tossed lives. Mixed up callers phoning into KACL with existential dread and attachment disorders before Frasier's first sip of sherry. The Blues Are Callin' was literally depressed listeners dialing the station. The whole song was a psychiatric intake form disguised as smooth lounge music, and it worked so well that an entire generation memorized it without cracking the code. And the voice selling that deception almost belonged to someone else. Jazz legend Mel Torme was briefly considered to perform the track, which would have made it sound incredible and completely disconnected from the show. So the producers insisted that Kelsey Grammer sing it himself, putting Frasier Crane's actual voice on a song that was secretly about his own patients. Hey, quick pause. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Frasier's behind-the-scenes chaos, hit that like button and drop a comment with your favorite Frasier moment. All right, back to Seattle. Number 7. Martin's recliner was custom built to be hideous. The most expensive apartment on NBC had a designer kitchen, architectural furniture, and a living room that looked like it was curated by a man who alphabetizes his wine by region and vintage. And dead center in all of it sat a recliner that looked like it crawled out of a 1974 garage sale and refused to leave. Martin Crane's chair wasn't a prop department accident either. The set designers went out specifically hunting for the ugliest recliner that they could find. When the search somehow came up short, in a world full of ugly recliners, they built one worse. They bought an old chair and custom reupholstered it in aggressively 70s striped fabric. Olive green, mustard yellow, the kind of pattern that looks like it smells faintly of, like, cigarettes and bowling alley carpet. And then they attacked it with wire brushes to age the fabric. They slapped duct tape on the arms to simulate decades of abuse, and distressed the whole thing until it looked like it had survived 30 years of football Sundays and spilled beer. The production team put more craftsmanship into making that chair look terrible than most shows put into their entire sets. And when the chair got destroyed in the season 9 episode Balazy Boy, the production had to get the exact ugly fabric rewoven by a specialty mill to recreate the precise shade of offensive. Now, that chair cost more to maintain than most real furniture costs to buy. Number 6, the cast cashed in and then cashed out. By the early 2000s, Frasier's production costs were climbing so fast that the budget meetings probably needed their own therapist. In 2001, Kelsey Grammer signed a deal worth $1.6 million per episode for the final stretch of the series. At the time, that made him the highest paid actor in television history. Not the highest paid sitcom actor, the highest paid actor, full stop. The man was earning more per half hour of psychiatric advice than most actual psychiatrists see in a lifetime. Now, David Hyde Pierce was reportedly pulling in about $1 million an episode himself. Stack the rest of the ensemble, production costs, and those meticulously lit Seattle Skyline trans lights on top, and the show, well, it was burning roughly $5 million every time someone yelled action. Now, NBC had locked in a massive renewal deal covering seasons 9 through 11, so the ending wasn't a surprise cancellation. But by the time season 11 rolled around, the math was getting uncomfortable. Ratings dipped, but costs kept climbing, and the gap between what the show earned and what it cost to produce was shrinking faster than Maris at a dinner party. Now, here's where it gets rare. Several cast members reportedly agreed to salary adjustments to make sure that the final season actually happened. Frasier ended in 2004 on its own terms. The cast made sure that they got a real goodbye, and that decision is worth more than any per-episode quote. Number 5, the Space Needle kept disappearing from Frasier's window. Now, for a show set in Seattle, Frasier treated its most famous landmark like a background extra with an unreliable schedule. Frasier Crane's apartment had those gorgeous floor-to-ceiling windows with a glittering skyline view. And right there, front and center, of course, sat the Space Needle, except when it didn't. Because that thing, well, it came and went like a guest star that nobody bothered to lock into a contract. Now, sharp-eyed fans started catching it mid-run. One episode, the Needle's right there, anchoring the whole skyline. Next episode, it's gone. The most recognizable structure in Seattle was treating Frasier's window like an open mic night. It was just showing up whenever it felt like it. The whole skyline was a massive still photograph called a translite. It was mounted about 10 to 20 feet behind the balcony set. The view was based on a composite shot taken from Cary Park on Queen Anne Hill, which meant Frasier's supposedly downtown penthouse had a sightline that would require bending the laws of geography. Different seasons swapped out different versions of the backdrop, and the Space Needle's placement, it shifted depending on which translite was hanging that week. Number 4, Jane Leeves' pregnancy became Frasier's most controversial storyline. Most sitcoms handle a pregnant actress the same way. You hide her behind a couch cushion for 5 months and pretend that nobody notices. But Frasier looked at that tradition and said, no, we can do worse. When Jane Leeves got pregnant during season 8, the writers decided to address it head on by giving Daphne Moon a compulsive overeating storyline. The woman had just gotten together with Niles after a 7-season slow burn, and then the show celebrated that long-awaited romantic payoff by immediately handing her a binge-eating arc. Leeves wore a progressively larger fat suit as the season went on, and the jokes landed exactly where you'd expect, squarely on Daphne's weight. When maternity leave arrived, Daphne got shipped off to a weight loss spa. The script literally called it a fat farm, which is aged pretty roughly, like gas station sushi. The storyline remains one of the more polarizing creative swings in the show's entire run. Number 3, the disturbing real-life connection behind the name Niles. In April of 1968, Kelsey Grammer's father, Frank Allen Grammer Jr., was murdered during a home invasion in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The man responsible was named Arthur Bevan Niles. Now, years later, when Frasier introduced Frasier Crane's younger brother, the character's name was Niles. Now, in the series itself, the explanation is simple. Frasier and Niles were named after their mother Hester's lab rats. Yeah, that's the official line, and nobody involved has ever publicly said otherwise. But fans have been pulling at that thread for decades, because the coincidence, it doesn't stop there. Frasier's son on the show is named Frederick. Grammer's younger sister, Karen, was murdered in 1975 by a man named Freddie Lee Glenn. 2 character names, 2 real-life tragedies for Kelsey Grammer, both separated by just enough distance to make confirmation impossible and dismissal quite uncomfortable. Number 2, Roz Doyle was named after a real producer who passed away. For 11 seasons, Roz Doyle was the only person at KACL who could shut Frasier Crane down mid-lecture and make him thank her for it. But that name wasn't pulled from a hat. It was pulled from a eulogy. Now, before Frasier existed, creators all worked together on Wings, and on that production, there was a real producer named Roz Doyle. Beloved in the industry, she was tough as hell, and famous for holding entire productions together while everything around her caught fire. In 1991, Doyle was diagnosed with breast cancer. According to industry accounts, she received a call about her terminal diagnosis while working in the editing bay during production of the Wings pilot. The woman stepped away, collected herself, and walked right back in to finish the episode. That's the kind of person she was. When the Frasier team started building their new show, they gave her name to the character who would become Frasier Crane's anchor. They could have named the character anything. They named her after the toughest person that they ever worked with. Number 1, A-list celebrities were hiding in every episode. Now, every episode of Frasier started the same way. I'm listening. And apparently, half of Hollywood, they took that personally. Now, one of the show's longest-running bits was the radio callers. Anxious insomniacs and emotionally collapsing strangers whose problems somehow required a Harvard-educated psychiatrist broadcasting live to the greater Seattle metro area. Standard sitcom setup, except the voices on the other end of the phone belonged to uncredited A-list celebrities. The tradition launched right out of the gate. The pilot featured Linda Hamilton, Sarah Connor herself, as a woman mourning a breakup. By the second episode, Christopher Reeve called in as a man afraid to leave his house, Superman with agoraphobia. That's the kind of casting irony that you can't buy. And from there, the roster got ridiculous. Halle Berry, Ben Stiller, Eddie Van Halen once played a caller who couldn't hear Frasier because his own radio was blasting too loud in the background, which might be the most on-brand celebrity cameo in television history. Now, during live tapings, the caller's lines were read off-camera by a stand-in, so Grammer had someone to react to. One of the regular readers was Arlene Sorkin, the original voice of Harley Quinn. The actual celebrities recorded their lines later, usually over the phone, which let the show land names that would have been impossible to book for a studio visit. The audience had zero idea what they were hearing. The identities only came out at the end of each season in a thanks for calling montage that flashed headshots of every famous voice who phoned in. The show turned celebrity cameos into a year-long magic trick and never once broke character to take a bow. And there you have it, 15 weird and wild facts about Frasier. Which fact surprised you the most? Well, drop it in the comments and share this with a friend who loves Frasier. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell. Until next time, thanks for calling. This is Remember When.